James is going to talk about this while he eats his food with these wonderful special watermelon colored tomatoes and smoothie. And I'm going to do some tomato weighing. And this I should show you. This was today's Tiny Tim harvest from my deck. I just have a few plants, but wow, they're real troopers. And that was my peepel row, so that's a whole row of tomatoes, and I didn't get as many as the deck Tiny Tims. Oh, and I should show you that. So, and these, I have some of these this year. Well, what's that? I had grown these tomatoes, and I'd grown these tomatoes in the same area, and now I have that. So that's very interesting.
I wonder which is dominant.
I don't know. Oh, and I should show, you can see the sunflower in the background. That's very pretty. It's fallen over, but it's very pretty. I guess that's what firecracker sunflowers look like. So there you go, James.
Okay.
I'm gonna go harvest some tomatoes.
Well, I'm just going to mention, stay tuned. You might be able to contribute to this. Some person, maybe I'm using that term too loosely, but didn't like my review of Cat Stevens. What was it?
Yeah, so we'll be
Magic
doing
Cat.
that at a later time.
Yeah, I don't believe in responding to. Apparently, it was a strong opinion, all that sort of stuff. I don't believe in responding to stuff like that on the internet. Most of it is just trolling, so on and so forth. But Pauline wants me to come up with a response. I dealt with Cat Stevens very fairly. You know, I made clear, or I tried to make clear to anyone of any sense, it would have been very clear, that I was a former fan of Cat Stevens, and not quite a fanatic, but I really liked him well enough. I used to be, I'm not well off now, but I was very poor for a teenager where I came from. All the guys seemed to have at least one vehicle. The rich man's kid in our community had something like a Camaro, and then a little car that he drove around when he was using dope, a little English car. So it didn't look like anything that a dope fiend would be using or doping up. And then he had a motorbike too. But most of the kids, boys my age, had a car, or vehicle I should say, and a motorbike. I had neither of those. So when I bought a record album, I think they were somewhere between $4 and $5, but that's when $4 or $5 kind of meant money. I can't remember. Around that time, I had a job in the summer between grade 11 and grade 12, so almost exactly that period of time. I can't remember what I got paid per hour. Was it $5, $7.50 or something like that an hour? It was like an hour's worth of wages, and that was only a summertime job. There weren't that many hours in the summertime, so I had to buy my clothes and entertainment, all that sort of stuff. Not that I went to many movies, hardly any. I can remember around that time going to the Beatles' Let It Be movie, and a little bit later, George Harrison's Bangladesh concert. But those were music kind of movies, and that's what I spent my entertainment money on. So yeah, I bought the first two Cat Stevens albums. I think they dated from 70 and 71, or 71 and 72. And I'll give you the names. T for the Tillerman, and Teaser and Pirate Cat. So I like Cat Stevens even before Moon Shadow came out, but that song, as I mentioned before, is a very nice song, very well done. The lyrics don't overreach, they're kind of simple. And Cat Stevens is basically something like a cartoonist. So if you look at the covers of those albums, those covers were done by Cat Stevens. I don't know if he got any training in art. He might have gone to art school. John Lennon did. Basically, they'd set up that stream for people who weren't doing that well. A lot of rock and rollers went to art school. I think Eric Clapton did, John Lennon did, Ron Wood with the Faces. Well, actually, originally the Jeff Beck group, and then the Faces, and then backup for Rod Stewart and the Faces at the same time. Eventually, the Rolling Stones. He ended up being quite a good artist. So maybe Cat Stevens went that route. He wasn't nearly as good as Ron Wood. You know, did John Mayall go that route? I can't remember. I wasn't around right then. Or maybe I was. But I wasn't on location, as it were. In situ, as the ancient Latins probably said. So, yeah, kind of cartoonish, moon shadow, but it gets the job done. Nice melody. But Pauline wants me to go through the lyrics for some Cat Stevens song, and I will give Cat Stevens, as I did before, a fair hearing, as I did when I was young. So 70, 71, 71, 72, when I was 16, 17, or 17, 18, I was already realizing, grab this, I could write better lyrics than Cat Stevens. Why would I go out and spend money? For me, it was exorbitant money for something that I could do better. And I'm not exaggerating. Of course, nowadays, his efforts seem laughable by comparison with what I'm capable of doing, what Pauline does, compared with what I've done. More in the 80s and stuff like that. Yeah. So I made it perfectly clear why Cat Stevens is pretty well junk. And it's not as though I'm coming from outside things. Like, I criticize Calgarians as drivers. That's people from Calgary. I'm not talking about all of them, but the vast majority are absolutely garbage drivers. And what I say about Edmonton, the capital of the province, and it used to be the biggest city in the province, but it's since been surpassed by Calgary. I say to people from Edmonton, and I speak from experience, Edmonton's a nice place to come from, it's a nice place to go back to. Then I say, Calgary's a nice place to come from, I leave out, it's a nice place to go back to. And I'm a former Calgarian, I know what I'm talking about. I still drive through there. I try to drive by there on the bypass, Stony Trail. It's a garbage city. Don't take that with a grain of salt. Take that, Calgarians. Get a life. I'm talking to the vast majority of Calgarians. You think you're Americans. You don't even know how to drive like Americans. You drive the same speed, but you don't have the skills. Now, I don't think American drivers really have the vast majority of them don't have there's this thing with skills with driving, but then there's judgment. And really, what do you get when you mix skill with driving and lack of judgment? It's not somewhere in between. It's just lack of judgment. That's the thing that ultimately matters. Because people who've got lack of judgment are always going to drive beyond their level of skill. Doesn't matter how high it is, how high their level of skill is, they're going to drive beyond that. Now that's what you get when you mix driving skill with lack of judgment in driving. You just get lack of judgment in driving. So because Pauline asked me, she didn't even have to ask me nicely, although she asked me nicely. She asked me to do a special sort of, it's a favor to the idiot who responded. I don't even know if it's unkindly. She suggested it was maybe over the top. Like any negative review of what I said about Cat Stevens is over the top. Like I say, I was very kind to Cat Stevens. Cat Stevens is a idiot, and that's before his conversion and before his approval. It basically seconding the fatwa, the death contract put out on Salman Rushdie. Anyone who does that seconds the Ayatollah Khomeini's contract put out on the life of Salman Rushdie is an absolute, well, it should be criminal. It should be a felony to second a contract put out on someone. I don't care if it comes from mafia or from some religious group or some, there are a lot of communists who basically, anarchists, like, oh, let's wipe out this capitalist or whatever. Anyone who seconds something like that should be in jail for a long, long time. I think it should be life imprisonment, frankly. And that's in a democracy, folks. Okay.
So for some reason, you can see there's a lot of green tomatoes here. Somehow, a lot of tomatoes were knocked down onto the bottom. I think somebody might have come by and wanted to take tomatoes, and they were like, how do I get in under the mesh? And so they just shook the plants, and
it's possible.
A lot of green ones came
out.
Because I don't know
which
why.
side were they on? The street side?
No, they're just, what are you talking about? They were falling down onto the bales, like onto the ground where they grew.
Okay, there we go. I don't know.
Oh no, it's weird. So because, I don't know what happened, but yeah. Like this one here probably won't ripen. It's too white. It won't ripen. And maybe not this one either. And I don't know what happened there.
Anyway, but I saw one down on the street. It was obvious what happened. Someone got too close to the curb and clipped the thing off.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't. We have a lot of tomatoes, so it's not gonna.
It's the thought that counts, or lack of it.
Look at all of this off of just a few plants. So honestly, we'll see. I'm gonna go harvest in the back. It'll take me a bit longer than normally, I think.
So
because I'm aching.
Day before yesterday, not yesterday. We didn't. Well, we were up in the hills and we just did a couple of music reviews and stuff like that. Up in the mountains, actually. But I think it was 2 days ago. I was talking about the Ming Dynasty and how some people going on the basis of the novel. No, that's funny. It's supposed to be history, but it's kind of like a novelization. Imagine what would happen if the latter-day Ming emperors hadn't pulled the plug on the argosies setting out from China, heading west, young man, west. They would have, I think according to the guy who wrote the book, but definitely according to some of his acolytes, like my brother, who had a PhD and should have known better, who really thought that's, China would have ended up colonizing Africa without quinine, of course. No, it wouldn't have worked out. The Arabs are already there on the east coast of Africa. They had a post set up in Zanzibar, and there was at least one a little bit north of them. I suspect they had something set up around 1400 AD in Zanzibar. But yeah, they didn't bother, from what I've heard, coming in land. They didn't have quinine. Malaria would have wiped them out. They wouldn't have been able to set up colonies in Africa. They were slaving hand over fist, well before the Europeans were. And ultimately, if you look up Arabs and probably Persians, Muslims in general, they did a really brisk business in getting hold of human bodies and human souls. They were doing it longer than Europeans, and they brought in maybe twice as many, at least 50%, something like 50% more slaves from Africa and stuff like that. So, oh, the Ming Dynasty. Yeah, the Ming Dynasty. Their farthest reaching argosy reached the east coast of Africa, according to responsible look at their records. Well, the Arabs were there already, and they were headed from the east coast of China, argosy. Well, Muslim traders, Arab traders, stuff like that, they've made it into at least the South China Sea. The stretch, the diameter of the stretch was the same. And the Arabs have been doing it before. The Chinese would have been using Arab and other Muslim folks' expertise to navigate their way through the Straits of Malacca, around the coast of India, and then along the northern part of the Indian Ocean, and then down along the east coast of Africa, a small way. But put it in perspective, the Latins, the Romans, I gather, was Imperial Rome. It might have been a little after the time of Augustus, but somewhere in there, maybe around the time of Hadrian. He died, maybe 138 AD. He ethnically cleansed the Jews. Didn't take finally, but that was the second time they were ethnically cleansed by the Romans. 70, 71 AD, and then 135 AD. They had, people say, well, it was for final and for good, 135. Well, why wasn't it in the 70? Because it's hard to do ethnic cleansing unless you do like a Nazi thing and wipe people out. It's hard to do this kind of stuff and make it stick. You got to keep on ethnically cleansing people because they drift back. That's what happened with the Acadians. They were ethnically cleansed from Acadia, basically the maritime provinces. And there's still an Acadian shore I believe that's in Prince Edward Island. It used to be called l'Île de Saint-Jean or something like that, St. John's Island, by the French people. But I don't know if French people live in it. It's not quite on the Acadian shore, whatever it's called. Crapaud. What does that mean? I think it means toad. It's a place. It might just be in Sterling, but there's in Nova Scotia where we think the bulk of the Acadians came from, something like the Annapolis Valley. If you go kind of west of Digby, Digby seems to be it's not so much English name, it's Scandinavian actually. B is kind of like a Norse designation, probably for an estate or a farm or enclosure or something like that. But eventually came to mean something like a town, village, whatever. But if you go west of there, there are all sorts of French names. And the bay south of there, I think it's called St. Mary's Bay or something like that. And I think there's still a fair number of French people drifted back. So newsflash. It's a historical newsflash. If you study a little bit of history, you realize that. So you're not going around strutting and saying, oh, the Jews they were totally flushed out of the Palestine. Get it straight, it's Israel, okay? Palestine is a colonial designation. It was set up for that area by the Romans when they ethnically cleansed the Jews out of there. And what they were saying is, hey, you Philistines, it's your land now. You're their neighbors, but now we're making it your land. Yeah. Palestine means Philistine. Don't believe me. I don't want anyone to believe me. Check it up. And then you'll find out I'm right. Don't go around saying I'm wrong and not checking up. So, Ming Dynasty. China, by times, has extended to maybe even beyond the limits that they've appropriated to themselves. I don't know if they ever really went heavily into Nepal, but they're in the process of digesting. Well, it's actually eating Nepal right now. The people there tend to be Hindu, and I don't know. Like ethnically, what are you going to say? There'd be a mixture of folks from the northern part of the Himalayas and from the southern part of the Himalayas. But they aren't Kami. They're not Kami, and they're not Chinese. The language is Indo-European. Check it out, don't like I actually have looked at a Nepalese Bible at a something like a church service. It was like a Christmas celebration in a, weirdly enough, a Salvation Army church. And I just asked, like I was waiting for celebrations to begin, something like that. They're kind of practicing. It sounded nice. I said, do you have a Bible? They brought it out. I started looking at Genesis, which I knew well enough so I could look on the fifth day, and you can see that it's got a P and as I recall, an N, at the very least a dental. I'm going, well, that's like pent or panch. Some of the languages to the south of Nepal. That means five. Late Indo-European. I shouldn't have to tell you that the Chinese languages, and linguists say there's 6. The Chinese themselves say there are 7 languages in China that use the Chinese script, one form or another. They're not related, not even close. You'd have to say if there was some sort of relation, it goes back to Adam and Eve or some Neanderthal or something like that. Okay? Get that straight. Stop imagining and reimagining and reimagining and all that sort of stuff. Get down to the brass tacks. Guess what? There's something like reality. You'll never know it. But, you got to try to strive to reach for it, like an asymptote or something like that. Like, strive for it. Don't just go around saying, well, we'll never have reality. There's no such thing, therefore. And then we can just imagine and reimagine it. Yeah. The commies tried that, and they just flunked out. They couldn't handle reality. They were trying to just create things out of scratch. The commies tried it. And they lost the Cold War. And understand, the Cold War didn't start with the Americans. Okay, the Americans just got involved in something that was a one-way war up to that point in time. The Cold War is as old as the Communist International. And I gather that was set up well before World War II. Now, for a while, it was put into abeyance during World War II when the commies in Russia were trying to get the Allies to pull the commies' irons out of the fire. But it wasn't soon after that they actually acknowledged what was the actual fact, the situation. The commies were actually fighting the Allies in Eastern Europe, for example. Even before World War II ended, they were there just aggrandizing territory to themselves, right, left, and center. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, the Chinese were having trouble. The Tang Dynasty boundaries were hugely extended. Well, I'd say distended, but of China. But, you look at what happened afterwards, and the dynasties were kind of had trouble controlling stuff that we think of as being traditional territory, that we consider traditionally consider being Chinese. Stuff they didn't have any right to, many cases, too many cases, like the Turkish area, Turkic, I should say, area to the west part of China, where the Uyghurs are, for example. The Uyghurs are related to the Turks, yeah, Uyghurs. And the Chinese just figured they'd control the territory. No, the Uyghurs aren't native to there, but they're more native than the Chinese are. When they found mummies there in the western part of China, in some of the more desiccated areas, much of that area is desert, and the mummies date from 1,000, maybe 2,000 years ago. And they've got reddish brown hair, fair skin. Yeah, that's not what Turks are like. Yeah. The Turks come from Siberia. That's where they belong. Now, I don't believe that they should be ethnically cleansed there, but they shouldn't be going around, Turkic people like the Turks shouldn't be going around telling the Jews to get back to where they came from, when the Jews are actually sitting on their native land, their own native land. The Turks are hyper hypocrites when they're doing that. It's not, because the Jews are actually on their native land. The Turks aren't. They've come in and they raped and pillaged and plundered and stole and burned and all that sort of stuff. Just getting to Turkey, yeah, like they don't belong in former Soviet Central Asia. So the Kazakhs don't belong in Kazakhstan. The Kyrgyz don't belong in Kyrgyzstan. The Turkmen don't belong in Turkmenistan. The Uzbeks don't belong in Uzbekistan. Did I leave any of these ne'er-do-wells? No. I sure don't want to, but it's at least those four. The people in Tajikistan actually belong there. Indo-Europeans. Indo-Europeans in that area are, so far as we can tell, the natives. Same thing in Iran. They're Indo-Europeans there. Now they control areas that they don't have any right to control, but so it's a rump of a former extensive empire. That's Iran. Yeah. So the Chinese had trouble controlling stuff, and this isn't the first manifestation of it. But the Mongols had this huge big empire that only included this relatively small part of it, China. And the Mongol Empire lasted for quite a long time, like in China. So it would have started with Khubilai, and it lasted for, it looks like, over 100 years, roughly 100 years, up till 1368. The Ming Dynasty, started a little bit, I think, before 1400. But you look at it, you see, like, even the Spaniards, who ended up controlling a large part of the world after Christopher Columbus, a Genoese kind of guy, came from Genoa. He was an Italian, but he was flying. No, he was floating around for the Spanish kingdom at that point in time. I think it's the Kingdom of Castile. So Ferdinand and Isabella, 1492. That's the same time when the Spaniards ethnically cleansed the Jews out of their population, and that was a stupid thing to do, and not nice. They also ethnically cleansed